Okay, Monoblack Control, match number 5. We're going for the fabled 5-0. And this hand is extremely weird. We have Chanter's Edicts, which are good against mid-range decks. We have Anglers. One of them is good, but two of them is going to take forever to cast, because the first one's going to eat up all the delve fuel of the second one. And these Chanter's Edicts aren't even good to delve away. This hand is pretty bad. I really want to keep it though, because I hate mulliganing, but I think this hand is bad enough to mulligan. Go down to 6. And this hand is more reasonable. Pestilence we're going to get rid of. We're going to look for a land. Now we have a removal spell, a Rats, and Oubliette. And hopefully we'll draw lands to be able to cast our spells. Alright, we're playing against Affinity. No need to disfigure that Germ token. In Affinity, the things that matter are the artifacts, and the Germ is not an artifact. And most likely the Flater Husk will get moved to something else, and the Germ will die in a couple turns anyway. Springleaf Drum. Well, that's one reason to get rid of the Germ, so they can't Springleaf Drum any color of mana. Alright, and they have a Somber Hoverguard turn 2. We have nothing else going on, so we'll disfigure that and pass the turn. Our opponent's down to 2 cards in hand, drawing to 3. They have a card basically stored away in this chromatic star, so see if our opponent draws the Atog. Atog is the scariest card in our opponent's deck. So it's a 2 mana 1/2, I believe, and it has Sacrifice and Artifact. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And the main reason it's scary is not only because it's so strong. I'm going to Oubliette this 4/4, so I don't start taking damage from it, is because the deck also plays Fling as a combo. So they play the Atog, they sacrifice some artifacts, they fling the Atog at your face while you're tapped out, or while they know you can't do anything about it, and then they kill you. And they can do that even from 20 life. They just need 10 artifacts to do it. But generally they get some damage in early with other creatures, and then finish you off with Atog. Sometimes they fling it, sometimes they don't have to. But no matter what the case, it's always the scariest card in their deck. Alright, opponent's only attacking us for 1 on turn 4, which is a pretty slow draw by Affinity. But we did have removal spells, which is why that is the case. Alright, we only have one thing we can play here, and we do want to play it, so we will. Got a Chittering Rats, making our opponent put a card back on top of their deck. Pass the turn. Alright, our opponent passes. They don't have anything to do. They play out a land, so they have 1 card in hand. As much as I would like to cycle this land, I need to get my Grey Merchants online so I can get out of burn range of Atogs, and so I can play this Angler. Opponent plays another land and passes. Alright, I'm going to attack this turn, because I have the Grey Merchant to block now. I'm ready to start trading damage. And I'm going to play the Gurmag Angler first, actually. I don't need to gain life just this turn, I'm still at 19. Even if our opponent had exactly Atog plus Fling, they only have 9 artifacts to sacrifice. So next turn we get to attack for 7, then Grey Merchant for 7 Devotion, and that should be game. We'll go ahead and Grey Merchant before combat. See if our opponent has anything they want to do to our creatures that might change what we're attacking with, but I think no matter what, we're attacking with both. Alright, our opponent doesn't remove anything in response. We attack for 7. And our opponent presumably chumps. Our opponent chumped the Gurmag Angler, took 2 down to 9, and they are dead to Grey Merchant trigger alone next turn unless they start removing our creatures. Okay, they're going to Galvanic Blast to finish off the Angler. Chromatic Star, presumably they're going to crack that right now to try to find some creatures. Alright, there's the Atog. And they have 1 card coming to them off of the star. They're sacrificing it with the Atog. So the star and the sphere are slightly different. The star says when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So you don't actually have to activate it in order to get the card. Chromatic Sphere, the draw a card effect is at the end of the sacrifice ability. So you have to actually activate it. So there they did the trick where they sacrifice it to the Atog. and they don't actually have to pay the mana. They draw into a Carapace Forger. So they have two blockers, including one that can get basically infinitely big, which is the Atog. But we're going to get a Grey Merchant trigger here, which is going to be pretty big for 7, and they'll go down to 2 life, which is a very good start. We can also play the Rager first if we so desire. Let's see, if our opponent draws Fling, exactly. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 artifacts. So as long as we commit to chump blocking the Atog, we're going to be fine. So I think we're going to play this Rager first, try to draw removal or some more devotion pips for our Grey Merchant. And we draw a Victim of Night. Perfect. So we're going to pass the turn. We're going to let our opponent attack and sacrifice things to the Atog, and then we're going to shoot the Atog in response. Flayer Husk. That's perfectly fine. So now our opponent is definitely dead to Grey Merchant triggers plus attacks, because the Grey Merchant is going to trigger for 9 all by itself. So the only thing we need to do is not die this turn. And if we Victim of Night the Atog, then that's impossible to happen. So we need to start thinking about how we're going to sideboard. I don't think we have any specifically anti-affinity cards, but we want as much removal for Atog as we can possibly find. And we also want as much early interaction with big creatures like Carapace Forgers and Mirror Enforcers as we can possibly find. Gurback Anglers are going to be very good because they block those creatures. Pestilence is going to be less good since we'd have to activate it for 4 to get rid of some of their cards. And Grey Merchant ends it with a 9 Devotion. Alright, that's game 1. Let's check out our sideboard. So against Affinity, Wrenchmine is positively awful because they have artifact lands, and that might only make them discard 1 artifact land. Pestilence is pretty bad since they're an aggro deck, we can't afford the life loss from it. Choking Sands doesn't do anything. Shrivel doesn't do anything. They're an aggro deck, so Font of Return's not going to have enough time to work. Duress, looking for Galvanic Blast and Fling is kind of a thing, but unfortunately, they can just Galvanic Blast us in response and probably leave themselves with no non-creature spells in hand most of the time. I guess it can grab early stars as well to prevent our opponent from fixing their mana. Is there anything that needs to come out? Coambage Witches can take out Flayer Husk and can chump block. That's about it. So I think those are going to be the obvious choices. Sign in Blood is also dangerous against an aggro deck. I want the Sign in Blood so I can find my other spells, but they cost me 2 life, whereas Coambage Witches is basically a gain 2 life spell if I have to chump block with it. I gain roughly 2 life. Sometimes I gain as much as 4, or even more if I'm blocking an Atog. And it also provides 2 Devotion to Gary. I think I'm going to do it. Get rid of 3 Sign in Blood, just because our opponent is very aggressive, and bring in 3 Duress. And actually, I can only take out 2 Sign in Blood because that only takes me to 59 cards. So that's 60 cards. I think that's how we want to divide it right now. Besides possibly bringing in Pestilence or Sign in Blood over Witches, I don't see any other changes we could make. We just have to have removal for the Atog whenever they play it. So we need to make sure we save our removal, but that's a hard thing to do when our opponent plays turn 2 Sombra Hoverguard or turn 2 or 3 Mirror Enforcer and Carapace Forger, and we have 4/4s that are starting to attack us. So we need to ration our removal accordingly. Alright, game 2. We're on the draw. We have the Duress that we sideboarded into. And we have 3 removal spells, a Disfigure, a Chainer's Edict, and an Oubliette, but we only have 1 land. This is a difficult decision. I think I'm going to keep... I have a lot of really good spells here. If I just draw 1 land, I have a lot of action between 1 Disfigure, 1 Chainer's Edict, 1 Duress, and 1 Sign in Blood. If I don't draw that 1 land, I'm probably in a huge amount of trouble. So we'll Duress turn 1 instead of holding up Disfigure. 2 stars, an Atog, a Standard Bearer, and a Tree of Tails. So Standard Bearer, basically we have to remove Standard Bearer before we remove any other creatures, because it draws targets to itself. We can't target something else unless we also target a flag bearer. So we're going to take a star and leave our opponent with a star, an ATOG, standard bearer, and one tree of tails. These disfigures might end up targeting ATOG just to get our opponent to sacrifice lands and slow them down. We'll see. Our opponent plays a standard bearer and then uses its springleaf drum to play the star as well. Go ahead and get rid of the standard bearer while we can, before they can use it to generate mana or attack for one. Our opponent has drawn a Frogmite, which they were casting for free. Down comes the ATOG. And our opponent has no cards in hand. Excellent. So there is a disfigure. I want to get rid of this ATOG. However, our opponent's just going to sacrifice Chromatic Star to save it. So I think I should get rid of Frogmite and plan on drawing a land for Chainer's Edict, because Chainer's Edict gets around the ATOG getting arbitrarily large. Alright, our opponent's sacrificing the Frogmite to get +2/+2, but that's not going to do anything, because we have no follow-up play this turn. Our opponent sacrifices the star to do an extra 2 damage to us and to crack it for a card. They play a Seat of the Synod, and their last card in hand is now Somber Hoverguard. So our Chainer's Edict is not going to work, but if we disfigure the Somber Hoverguard, our Chainer's Edict is on again until our opponent draws another creature. So if we draw land, we could be fast enough with our removal to prevent dying. Our opponent is deciding right now if the Springleaf Drum is worth dealing 2 damage to us, which I imagine they'll decide that it is. They sacrifice a land, but not the Springleaf Drum. And we take 5. Alright, there's the land. And here's the disfigure. And we just have to fade one creature from our opponent. No Flayer Husk, no Carapace Forger, no nothing. And then this Edict will take out the ATOG. Okay, well, no such luck. Our opponent might sacrifice the Flayer Husk, though, if they get greedy. Or move the Flayer Husk over. Those are both possible actions. I don't think they're good actions, but they're possible. Now we're basically on drawing a swamp for Oubliette. Even a tap land is probably going to be too slow. Opponent attacks. Doesn't sacrifice any artifacts. Okay, so we can Sign in Blood ourselves here. Let's say our opponent just draws a land next turn. They'll have 6 artifacts and be able to attack us for 13. And that's basically best case scenario for us. So if we Sign in Blood, we basically kill ourselves. There's no way around that. So I'm going to Chainer's Edict here, just to save myself 1 damage, and to make me drawing a Chainer's Edict next turn able to take out the ATOG. But this is a pretty bad Chainer's Edict when I was hoping to get an ATOG with it. And see if our opponent kills us. Alright, our opponent equips the Flayer Husk. And is going to attack us. We'll see if they sacrifice anything. They don't. So we just take 2. And we just can't draw to save our lives. Next turn, our opponent, even if they have absolutely nothing in hand and draw nothing, can sacrifice 5 artifacts to deal 11 to us. I can't cycle this Baron more for anything. The only thing I could cast would be Duress or Disfigure, which don't do anything here. I suppose we could draw Disfigure and then our opponent goes for it and we disfigure it to gain 2 life essentially. And then untap an Oubliette and our opponent has no permanents, but that seems extremely unlikely of a play. So we'll just pass. We can in no way afford to Sign in Blood ourselves. I think that just puts us dead on board. So that makes 6 artifacts. If our opponent goes for it, they have it. But if they play around us having a removal spell, we might be able to get another turn. It just comes down to what our opponent believes that we have. Our opponent sacrifices a land, and they're just going to pass and be content with 4 damage to us. Alright, so we have a choice between Chainer's Edict and Oubliette here. Oubliette uses our mana better, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I don't think our opponent has counter spells for either one in their deck. We're very lucky that our opponent played around us having instant speed removal, because we'd be dead right now otherwise. Prophetic Prism to cycle for a card. We're still very afraid of them drawing a Tog plus Fling and killing us. I'm going to go ahead and play a Rager so we can start getting some attacks in and hopefully end this game at some point. We're also pretty afraid of just 2 Galvanic Blasts. Alright, it's turn 8. We finally hit our 4th land drop. We can't play our Angler right now, so we'll pass the turn. Carapace Forger. If we draw a Swamp, we can Tendrils that and gain some life in the process, which would be great. Unless our opponent has exactly Fling. Alright, they're equipping the Flayer Husk, so I take back that plan about Tendrils. That's not going to work. So I guess we're forced to either Oubliette or Chainer's Edict that creature. Let's see what we have in our graveyard. I want to also play the Angler this turn. So I don't want to have to delve away my Chainer's Edict, which means I'm playing 3 for the Angler, which means I can't play the Oubliette. I'm going to have to Chainer's Edict this. I don't think it makes much of a difference either way. Even despite not drawing any lands at all, we are going to manage to win this game, I think, unless our opponent goes exactly a Tog plus Fling or Galvanic Blast plus Galvanic Blast. I don't think there's any other combination of cards that's going to outrace Tendrils of Corruption, killing their next creature. Galvanic Blast number 1. Galvanic Blast number 2, and we are dead. Wow. Our opponent had a great draw. Well, they had a middling draw. They're killing us on turn 10, but we just had an absolutely horrible draw, so we couldn't kill our opponent in time. That's unfortunate. Let's on to game 3 and see if we can take that one down. Alright, game 3. We get to be on the play, so that's worth something for sure. And we only have 1 removal spell, but we have a good mix of lands and spells, so I think I'm going to keep it. Colombage Witches is not a great card, but if we draw a Grey Merchant, it could be worth something. It might also just be on chump duty to the first 4-4 or 5-5 that our opponent makes. I don't think our opponent can do anything with their graveyard, and I also don't want to have to play this tap land on a later turn when we might need the mana, so I'm playing it turn 1. Turn 1, Springleaf Drum. I don't want to have to discard here, so I'm going to play Witches first. Get some Devotion on the table. A little bit of insurance against Flater Husk. Our opponent misses their next land drop. Well, that's pretty incredible for us. Now we're going to see the awesome power of Chittering Rats. This ensures that our opponent is missing their next land drop as well. Like I said in the deck tech, this is effectively a time walk at this point, because our opponent did absolutely nothing with this turn cycle, and now is going to have the exact same turn cycle again due to Chittering Rats. Unearth. Well, I could do a very bold play of Chainer's Edicting our own Chittering Rats and then unearthing it, just for the trigger again, but that seems pretty dumb. I'm going to start with Sign in Blood to try to hit a land drop, and then I'm going to duress our opponent. And see what they have. So our opponent has a Tog, Frogmite, Mirror Enforcer, Standard Bearer, Fling, Galvanic Blast. So what does this hand do? Let's say they just get the luckiest and draw a red land next turn. That'll be 3 artifacts, so they could play double Frogmite. They could play... Yeah, they could play double Frogmite and then follow that up later with Mirror Enforcer. So what am I most afraid of? Am I most afraid of a Tog sacrificing things and then getting flung? They can also fling a Mirror Enforcer, or am I afraid of Galvanic Blast? I think I'm more afraid of Galvanic Blast right now. The Tog is so far away from killing us that I think I don't need to worry about it. So I'm going to get rid of Galvanic Blast. Our opponent, unfortunately, has such a strong hand that even though we effectively time-locked them and are getting an aggressive early start, they could dump their hand into the board and still be able to outrace us. Alright, they miss a land drop again. This bodes quite well for us. We're just going to keep on playing out creatures that can attack and end this game as quickly as possible. And we're also going to keep on missing land drops, but not as badly as our opponent has. So I think we're going to see the double Frogmite play here. There's number one, the second one is free. And actually they can play Mirror Enforcer as well by tapping Frogmite with Springleaf Drum, since the 5 artifacts make it effectively cost 2. Our opponent is apparently deciding between that and Standard Bearer. I think they should play the Mirror Enforcer since they don't particularly care about me. Yeah, there we go. Targeting one of their Frogmites. Alright, so can I get past a Mirror Enforcer? That is the question. I can go Chainer's Edict, but that only gets rid of the 2/2s. I think I'm going to have to Disfigure in order to get past. So I can attack, Disfigure the Mirror Enforcer when it blocks, trade off 2 creatures, and then also have a Chainer's Edict. Have another Chainer's Edict on backup, have an Unearth for whichever 3-drop they trade with. Yeah, that seems pretty great to me. I can't attack with the Witches because if the Mirror Enforcer blocks it, the Disfigure won't be enough to take it down. And I really need it off the table. Our opponent makes a double block, as we expected. We're going to 2-for-1 ourselves to do this. But now we get to Chainer's Edict and Unearth our rats to slow our opponent down. We know our opponent still has Fling, Atog, and Standard Bearer in hand. Standard Bearer is pretty bad against Quambage Witches, though. So I'm glad that we were forced to leave them in our deck by not having enough sideboard cards. Because it turns out that they were good against our opponent's sideboard cards, if not their main deck cards. Our opponent Thoughtcast for 2 mana, since playing Standard Bearer doesn't do much, and they pass the turn. We get to attack for 3. I'm going to play a Phyrexian Rager. I'm going to cycle away this Baron more. It's not even a swamp for Tendrils of Corruption. I'm going to pass. Another Springleaf Drum. Adds to their Affinity count, but doesn't really do anything else. We draw a land, which is good with double Tendrils in hand. Our opponent goes all the way down to 5. We're going to hold up in Tendrils instead of Sign and Blooding here, because we can also use the Sign and Blood as a burn spell for 2. There's a Frogmite for free. Opponent still has Fling, Atog, and Standard Bearer, and 2 unknown cards. And here comes the Atog. I'm going to go ahead and Tendrils of Corruption the Frogmite now before our opponent can sacrifice it in response, because I want to gain the life. Our opponent still has Standard Bearer and Fling in hand. And it looks like they're tapping the Atog to presumably play Carapace Forgery. Yep, there it is. So we can Victim of Night that out of the way. We could also Tendrils it out of the way. This gets around Mutagenic Growth, in case our opponent happens to have that in their deck, though I don't think any Affinity deck ever plays it. And we take it down. Excellent. Pretty excited to go 5-0 in the league. We get 2 boosters, 3 QPs, and 150 play points for our trouble. I think this greatly showcases the power of Monoblack Control against a variety of decks. There's a reason why Monoblack Control has been around forever, is because it's very popular. I also personally consider it a lot of fun to play. I really enjoy Grey Merchant of Asphodel. I really enjoy Chittering Rats and a lot of the other spells in the deck. It's basically just make a board state, remove your opponent's creatures, and keep on attacking and keep on trucking, which I think is a pretty fun game plan. Let me know in the comments below what you liked, what you didn't like, any misplays that I missed, what you guys want to see me play next. This has been Pennywise Pauper with Jake. Hope you guys liked the videos. As always, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel to see all of our latest stuff, and see Pennywise Pauper when it comes out next week. I'll see you next time.